The wife of his son threw her out of the house when they were alone, and only allowed her to take an old suitcase and a hen for her to eat along the way and not return. What his daughter-in-law didn't know was the secret that hen guarded, which could make anyone a millionaire. Agnes woke up at 5 inches the morning, as she had done all her life, without an alarm clock, without anyone calling her. Her 9-year-old body no longer needed permission to wake up early. The pain in her knees took care of that. She dressed slowly, a dark skirt, a blouse with flowers washed 1,000 times, her old, sturdy boots, which were the only ones that could withstand her swollen feet. She threw her threadbare shawl over her shoulders, even though the heat was already starting to seep through the cracks of the shack. She went out into the yard. The red hen was already awake, scratching near the clay water trough as she did every morning. Agnes threw her a handful of corn and the animal approached her without fear, pecking near her feet. "Good morning, old girl," Agnes said. Not as a joke. She meant it. That hen was older than any other animal in the yard. All the others had ended up in the pot at some point. Not her. Agnes hadn't let anyone lay a finger on her, and more than once she had had strong words with Meredith about it. That hen doesn't lay anymore. Meredith had told her the previous month with that voice of hers that always sounded like a complaint and a demand. She takes up space and eats without giving anything back. Agnes hadn't answered her. She had learned that with Meredith, it was better not to respond. But that morning the shack had something different. A silence that wasn't peace. It was the silence of when someone has already made a decision and is just waiting for the moment. Lachlan had left before dawn. Agnes had heard him saddle his horse in the dark. It wasn't unusual. Her son often went out to check the paddocks on the other side of the hill. Sometimes he would be gone until midday. Meredith knew this. Agnes was giving the hen water when she heard her daughter-in-law's footsteps crossing the veranda. Determined footsteps, not the steps of someone going to get coffee, but the steps of someone who had already rehearsed what she was going to say. The old woman didn't turn around immediately. She continued with her task. The hen pecked once more near her fingers. Something in that moment told Agnes that this day was going to be different from all the others. She didn't know how to explain it. She just felt it, like things that are beyond remedy. Meredith stood in the center of the yard with her arms crossed. She was 34 years old. She was thin, with a sharp face and an unblinking gaze. Her hair was tied back with a plastic comb, and her clothes were clean, as if she already knew that day was going to be important. "Agnes," she said. The old woman turned around, noticing the tone. It wasn't the tone of asking for something, it was the tone of someone who had already decided. "I need to talk to you about something." "Speak," Agnes said, drying her hands on her shawl. Meredith didn't beat around the bush. That had to be acknowledged. This house is small. 3 people don't fit well here, and you know it. Lachlan doesn't want to tell you because he's your son, but I'm telling you because someone has to. Agnes didn't reply. She let her continue. "Your children in town will welcome you. Callum has his house. He has space. You'd be better off there, near the doctor, near everything. The road here is long, and you're not up for these treks anymore." Each phrase sounded reasonable separately. Together, they were a slammed door. "Does Lachlan know this?" Agnes asked. Meredith didn't blink. "Lachlan agrees. It was a lie." Agnes knew it instantly with the same certainty she knew when it was going to rain. Her son had his weaknesses, he had his cowardly silences, but he would never have done something like this to his mother. Not without telling her to her face. Not this way. But Agnes was 89 years old and her knees were shot. She had no money of her own, no deeds in her name. The paddock belonged to Lachlan, and Lachlan was that woman's husband. "When?" she asked. Meredith took a step back as if she hadn't expected it to be so easy. "Today," she said, "while the day is still cool." Agnes looked at the paddock, the hard dirt yard she herself had swept for decades, the old gum tree she planted the year Lachlan was born, the weatherboard walls that knew her silhouette by heart. She didn't cry. She wouldn't give her that satisfaction. "I'll pack my things," she said, and entered the house without hurrying. Agnes didn't have much to pack. That was the saddest truth of all. 40 years on a paddock, and what was truly hers fit in an old cardboard suitcase reinforced with packing tape. 2 changes of clothes, the black rosary beads her mother had given her, a small, worn photo of her with her husband on their wedding day, both very young and very serious, as the times demanded, a tin box with needles, thread, and 2 spare buttons. That was all. She came out to the veranda, with the suitcase in her hand. Meredith was already waiting. She had gone to the yard and taken out the red hen, which was flapping and clucking, not understanding what was happening. She had tied a thin string to its leg to control it. "Take her," Meredith said, putting the end of the string in Agnes's free hand. "So you don't arrive hungry in town. You can eat her on the way." Agnes looked at the hen, then at Meredith. "This hen isn't for eating," she said. "She's old and useless," Meredith replied with the same calm as someone discussing the price of vegetables. "There's no point in leaving her here, taking up feed." Agnes took the string without saying anything else. It wasn't worth it. Meredith opened the main gate of the paddock and stood beside it, holding a handwritten note. "The bus passes on the main road every 3 hours," she said. "It's not that far to walk anyway." She put the note in Agnes's apron pocket without asking permission. It was Callum's address in town, written in tight handwriting and with no additional message. Agnes passed through the gate. Her old boots touched the dirt road on the other side. The gate closed behind her with a latch. The sound of the bolt falling was dry, definitive, like a forcefully written full stop. Meredith didn't say goodbye. The old woman stood for a moment in front of the closed gate with the suitcase in one hand and the hen's string in the other. The August sun was already beating down hard. The dirt road stretched straight and dusty ahead. She didn't turn back to look at the paddock. She started walking. The road had no shade. In August, that area was pure sun from 7 inches the morning, and the dust rose with every step and got into her throat. Agnes walked slowly because she had no other option. Her knees sent a throb with each stride, especially the right one, which had been getting worse for months. The town doctor had told her 2 years ago that she needed surgery that cost more than the paddock produced in 6 months. That was the end of that. The cardboard suitcase was light, but the fabric handle cut into the palm of her hand. She shifted it from one side to the other every so often. The hen tugged at the string occasionally, distracted by anything at the roadside, and Agnes gave it a gentle tug to keep it going. There was no one on the road. It was Tuesday midday, and those who had animals were already in the paddocks. Those who had jobs were already at them. The world was busy, and she walked alone on that road as if she were invisible. She passed the first kilometer without stopping. By the second, she began to feel thirsty. She hadn't brought water. She hadn't thought about it. Or maybe she did think, and the shock of what was happening didn't let her remember. The hen suddenly stopped and crouched, as if looking for something on the ground. Agnes also stopped involuntarily. Her knees appreciated the halt. She looked back for the first time. The paddock was no longer visible, only the road, the bare hillsides, a dry tree here and there. Nothing that was hers, nothing that waited for her. She looked ahead. The town was still far away. 3 hours if she walked well, more if her knees continued like this. She took a deep breath and continued. She didn't think of Meredith. She didn't have the strength for hatred yet. She only thought of the next step, of putting one foot in front of the other, of arriving. The hen walked beside her, barely tugging the string, as if understanding that it was not a time to be difficult. Halfway through the second kilometer, when the heat was already blurring her vision a little, Agnes began to remember, not because she wanted to, but because a tired body and an unoccupied mind opened doors that otherwise remained closed. She remembered old man O'Malley, Lachlan's father-in-law, Meredith's father, the father of the paddock, the man who had built all that with his hands before Lachlan inherited it. A dry man, of few words, who had never been affectionate with anyone, but who had always treated Agnes with respect. He died 4 years ago, stomach cancer. The last months he spent in a bed in the back room, growing thinner, growing quieter. The last week, when he was very ill, he called her. Not Lachlan, her. It was night. Agnes approached the bed, and the old man gestured for her to bend down. He smelled of medicine and things ending. He gripped her wrist with the few fingers that still obeyed him. "The red hen," he said with a voice that was barely a whisper. "Don't let her go, no matter what." Agnes thought the man was delirious. She asked him if he wanted water. He shook his head. "Don't let her go," he repeated, "and don't let anyone take her from you. When the time comes, you'll know what to do with what she carries." He said no more. He fell asleep and didn't speak of it again. He died 3 days later. Agnes had stored those words somewhere in her memory without fully understanding them. Over the years, it seemed to her like the delirium of a dying man. The hen was old and strange, yes, but she was a hen. What could a hen carry? Now, walking under that sun, pulling her string, those words came back to her clear and cold. Don't let her go, no matter what. She looked at the hen out of the corner of her eye. The animal walked calmly, pecking at the ground now and then. Agnes tightened the string. The third hour was the worst. Her knees no longer sent throbs. They sent something worse, a dull, continuous burning that climbed her thighs and reached her back. Agnes had had to change the way she walked, leaning a little forward with the suitcase as a counterweight. It wasn't a comfortable posture. It was a survival posture. Thirst dried her mouth and glued her tongue to her palate. The sun was directly overhead, casting no shadow in any direction. There was a gum tree at the edge of the road, about 300 meters ahead. Agnes fixed her eyes on it and walked towards that point without looking at anything else. When she arrived, she sat on a thick root that emerged from the earth. She put the suitcase beside her. The hen moved among the clumps of spinifex, searching for something. Agnes breathed with her mouth open, waiting for her heart to calm down a little. She looked at the hen. She thought about what it would be like to wring its neck right there under that tree, to do it quickly, eat something, truly rest. The idea was serious for a moment. It wasn't cruelty. It was the instinct of an old person, exhausted, without water, and without certainty that anyone waited for her at the end of that road. The hen lifted its head and looked at her, that round, still eye, fixed on her. Agnes exhaled. She didn't say it aloud. Though no one was there, she couldn't. She couldn't explain it better than that. It wasn't just the fondness of years. It was something more, something Old Man O'Malley had put into that order he gave her before dying, and that Agnes had carried without fully understanding, no matter what. She stood up with effort, grabbed the suitcase and the string, and kept walking. Her knees protested with new ferocity. She ignored them. The gum tree was left behind. The road was still long. The sun was still relentless. But Agnes kept moving with the hen beside her towards a town she still couldn't see. But that had to exist somewhere in that dust and heat. She didn't reach the town. Not that time. About 2 kilometers from the town center, where the road made a long curve next to an abandoned paddock, Agnes's knees simply gave out. It wasn't gradual, it was sudden. The right one went first, and the left one tried to compensate and couldn't, and the old woman fell sideways onto the dry earth, without letting go of either the suitcase or the hen's string. She stayed there on the ground under the sun. She didn't lose consciousness completely. She heard the buzzing of insects, the dry wind moving through the dead grass, the soft clucking of the hen near her head. The animal approached. Agnes could feel it moving around, stepping near her hands. The clucking continued softly, continuously, as if the animal were calling someone who could hear. Agnes tried to sit up. She couldn't. Her arms trembled, her head spun, her mouth was so dry that swallowing hurt. She thought of Lachlan. She thought of how her son would look when he arrived at the paddock that night and didn't find her. She thought about what Meredith would tell him. She thought about the lies that would already be prepared. She thought that if she died there on that road, no one would know until someone happened to pass by. And on that road, on Tuesdays, few people passed. The hen clucked louder. Agnes closed her eyes, not in surrender, but from pure exhaustion. She opened them again because closing them made her fear she wouldn't open them again. The sky was white from so much sun, without a cloud. She thought of a strange thing at that moment that she later couldn't explain well. She thought that if she had let go of that hen back at the paddock when Meredith handed it to her, she would be dead now. Not because of the hen, but because of what the hen had forced her to keep walking, not to give up sooner, to get as far as she had. It wasn't much comfort, but it was something. The clucking continued, and then she heard the sound of animal hooves on the road. Slow, calm, approaching. The man's name was Patrick. He was a big man, broad-shouldered and with skin burnt from years under the sun. He would have been in his late 50s, with a graying mustache and hands that seemed made of leather. He was riding a stock horse with 2 saddlebags tied to the sides and a metal canteen hanging from the saddle horn. The first thing he saw when he rounded the bend was the hen standing in the middle of the road, clucking. Then he saw the woman on the ground. He dismounted without a word, without fuss, like someone who had seen difficult things before and knew that fussing was useless. He knelt beside Agnes, putting his hand on her shoulder. "Ma'am? Ma'am, can you hear me?" She opened her eyes, taking a second to focus. "I hear you," she said, her voice hoarse. Patrick uncorked his canteen and offered her water without ceremony. Agnes drank slowly, not yet gripping it with her hands, because her arms still weren't obeying well. He held the container. "Can you stand with some help?" He helped her up. It wasn't easy, but he also didn't ask 1,000 times if she was sure, nor did he make a drama of her being too old for it. He got her to her feet, held her until she found her balance, and that was that. He picked up the suitcase from the ground, hung it on one of the horse's saddlebags, and returned the hen's string, which the animal had loosened a bit during the commotion. "I'll take you to town," he said. "Will you?" she asked. He affirmed. "No need to climb up," Patrick said. Agnes didn't argue. He helped her mount carefully, mindful of her knees, without her having to explain anything. Then he climbed on himself, settling in the back of the saddle to leave her room in front. The horse started at a walk. Agnes held the hen on her lap, the string wrapped around her hand. The animal remained still, swayed by the movement. "Thank you," the old woman said after a moment. "No worries," Patrick replied, and they continued in silence down the road. A silence that wasn't awkward. The silence of two people who know that words can wait. They rode a good distance before either of them said anything. It was Agnes who spoke first, not because she wanted to converse, but because the horse passed by a wire fence, and she recognized the post markings. They were the boundaries of Old Man Palomino's paddock, which bordered the constable's jurisdiction. "Do you know these lands?" she asked. "I've traveled them for 20 years, Patrick said. "Drover. I pass through here every fortnight or so." "Do you know the local constable? His name is Frank." There was a pause, not long, but it was there. "I know him," Patrick said. Agnes noticed the change in his voice. It wasn't a dramatic change. It was the minimal change of someone holding back something they didn't want to let out. "And?" she asked. "Nothing," Patrick said. "What exactly does someone say when there's something?" Agnes didn't press. It wasn't her time. She carried too much of her own weight to push someone else's. But she kept that pause. She kept it carefully, like something that might be valuable later. They passed the boundaries of the abandoned paddock. The road widened a little, a sign that the town was near. "Do you have family there?" Patrick asked. "A son, Callum. Does he expect you?" Agnes took a moment to reply. "He doesn't know I'm coming," she admitted. Patrick said nothing to that. Nor did he make the gesture of pity she feared. He just kept looking at the road. The first roofs of the town appeared among the trees as they rounded a hill. The sun was beginning to drop from its highest point. The heat was still fierce, but it wasn't the same as at noon. The hen stirred on Agnes's lap, and she placed her hand on it to calm it. "Almost there," she told it. She didn't know if she was talking to the animal or to herself. Patrick guided the horse towards the main entrance of the town, without asking for directions, like someone who knew every stone of that path. Callum's house was on the second street of the town, a block after the general store. It was an unpainted fibro house, with a barred window at the front and a green metal gate that someone had welded crookedly. Patrick stopped there without Agnes giving him any indication. She didn't ask how he knew which one it was. In a town of that size, everyone knows everyone else's house. He helped her dismount with the same care as before. He handed her the suitcase, returned the hen's string, which had gotten tangled during the journey. "Thank you," Agnes said again. "You already told me," Patrick replied, not harshly, almost with a hint of something akin to warmth. Agnes looked at him. "What's your name?" "Patrick." "And your surname?" "We'll see each other again," he said, and mounted his horse before she could insist. The old woman watched him ride away down the dusty street. The horse kept a steady, calm pace. Patrick didn't look back. Agnes stood in front of the green gate. She knocked 3 times with her knuckles. It took a while for it to open. Inside, a radio could be heard with news and the sound of chairs moving. Callum opened the gate. He was 52 years old. He was stout, with a sparse mustache and eyes that always seemed slightly surprised. When he saw his mother standing there with the cardboard suitcase and the hen tied with a string, the surprise in his eyes mixed with something else. Agnes recognized immediately. Discomfort. "Mum," he said. "What happened?" "I've come to stay for a while," Agnes said. She didn't explain further. It wasn't the time. Callum looked at the hen, looked at the suitcase, looked at his mother, opened the gate a little wider and stepped aside. "Come in," he said. He didn't say, "How good to see you." He didn't say, "I'm so glad to see you." He didn't say any of the things a son says when his mother unexpectedly arrives at his door, looking like she's walked for hours under the sun. He just said, "Come in," and Agnes entered. Callum's wife was named Robin. She was a 48-year-old woman, quiet, but with an alert gaze, who when she saw her mother-in-law enter with the suitcase and the animal said nothing, but conveniently went to the kitchen and stayed there the rest of the afternoon. The house had 2 rooms, a small living room with a vinyl sofa, and the kitchen at the back. There was no extra space. That was evident from the door. Callum explained the situation with carefully chosen words, that the house was small, that Robin's children occupied the second room, that he understood it was difficult, but they had to organize themselves. "For now, you can stay on the veranda," he said. "We have a stretcher." The veranda was a 1.5 meter wide passage between the living room wall and the neighbor's wall, with no window, a concrete floor, and a bare light bulb above. Agnes said nothing. Callum set up the stretcher for her. That night, he put the hen in a cardboard box with holes he found in the yard. He gave her a glass of water and a plate of cold sausage roll with reheated damper. "We'll talk more tomorrow, Mum," he said and went into the house. Agnes ate the sausage roll sitting on the edge of the stretcher. The hen clucked once from the box and fell silent. There was no proper light on the veranda. The living room door had to be left ajar for some light to reach. When Callum closed it, the veranda became completely dark. Agnes lay down with her clothes on. Her knees throbbed, her back too. 40 years on that paddock, a whole life built with her hands. Giving birth to Lachlan without going to the hospital because the road was too long, burying her husband alone because there was no way to notify anyone in time, sustaining the house during the bad years when there was no corn, and now she was on a stretcher, in a dark passage in her son's house, who had received her as one receives an uninvited problem. She didn't cry, she just closed her eyes and waited for her body to quiet down a little. The second night was worse. It rained. It wasn't a strange August rain. It was one of those storms that fall suddenly without warning and shake the corrugated iron roofs with a force that seemed like anger. The veranda had an old corrugated iron roof, and water seeped through a poorly sealed joint in the corner, dripping in a cold stream onto the concrete floor. The cardboard box where the hen was began to soften with the dampness. Agnes got up from the stretcher, took off her shawl, and placed it over the box to protect it. She sat on the edge of the stretcher with her arms crossed over her chest, enduring the cold and the sound of the rain. Looking at the darkness, she didn't knock on the house door. She didn't call Callum. But across the street, behind a window with slightly rusted bars, a woman was watching. Deb had been unable to sleep for a while. It wasn't the first time she had observed that veranda from her window. She had seen the old woman arrive the day before. She had seen Callum set up the stretcher with a look of obligation. She had seen Callum's wife not show herself all day. That night, in the rain, she saw Agnes's silhouette sitting in the darkness, protecting a hen's box with her own shawl. Deb was 57 years old. She was broad-shouldered, with graying hair cut to the nape of her neck, with hands that always seemed ready to do something. She had lived alone for 3 years. Before, she hadn't lived alone. She grabbed an umbrella and a folded blanket. She crossed the street in the rain. She knocked softly on Callum's metal gate so as not to alarm anyone. Agnes heard the knock and got up. "It's the neighbor," said the voice on the other side. "Deb, don't be alarmed." Agnes unlatched the small bolt of the veranda gate. Deb entered with the dripping umbrella and handed her the blanket without saying much. "Come to my house," she said. "I have a spare room and a roof that doesn't leak." Agnes looked at her for a moment. "I don't know you," she said. "I don't know you either," Deb replied. "But I'm seeing you alone on this veranda in the rain, covering a hen's box with your shawl, and that's enough for me." The room Deb offered her was small but clean. A single bed with a firm mattress, a wooden chair, a window with a thin fabric curtain, and a hook on the wall for clothes. The floor was cold tile, but there was a braided rug beside the bed. Deb settled the hen in the interior courtyard, which had a palm roof and was sheltered from the rain. The animal shook its wet feathers and found a dry corner to stay in. The two women sat in the kitchen. Deb heated water and made a strong black tea without asking if she wanted it sweet or bitter. She put it on the table along with some day-old damper that was still good. "What's your name?" Deb asked. "Agnes." "Where are you from?" "O'Malley's Ridge, Dry Gully region." Deb nodded. She knew those parts. "Family?" "2 sons. Lachlan, who's at the paddock, Callum, who's right across the street looking like he doesn't know what to do with me." Deb smiled slightly, not mockingly, but in recognition. "My mum died on a borrowed stretcher at my sister's house," she said. "She arrived like that with a suitcase because they didn't want her anymore in the house where she lived. My sister wasn't a bad person. She was just a person who never learned what is owed to elders." She fell silent for a moment. "I didn't want another woman to go through the same thing if I could help it." Agnes looked at her. She was a direct woman, unadorned, without the kind of kindness that seeks recognition. She did things because she did them. "Why do you live alone?" Agnes asked. The question came out directly, without calculation. Agnes was like that too. Deb's expression changed slightly. "Just for an instant. My husband disappeared," she said, 3 years ago. She said no more that night, and Agnes asked no more. They finished their tea. The rain subsided until it was a soft drizzle. The town slept. Between the two women, something had been born that had no precise name, but that was real, the trust that is only built between people who already know the weight of carrying things alone. The next day, Deb noticed something. It wasn't immediately, it was while they were preparing breakfast, and the hen was loose in the interior courtyard, walking among the potted plants and stones. Deb watched her from the kitchen window, and something in the animal's way of moving caught her attention. "That hen limps," she said. Agnes leaned out. It was true. The hen walked well on its left side, but carried its right differently, with a slight discomfort that was more noticeable when it turned. "She's always limped a bit," Agnes said. I thought it was old age. Hens don't limp like that from old age, said Deb, who had raised birds all her life. They limp if they have something in their leg, or if they're carrying something they shouldn't. She went out into the courtyard. The hen didn't flee. She was an old animal, accustomed to people. Deb picked her up carefully, held her against her body, and checked her right leg first. Nothing. Then she opened the wing on the same side. There it was, stuck to the skin. Among the feathers on its flank, there was something that was neither feather nor flesh. Deb carefully palpated it. It was hard, small, sewn with something that wouldn't give way. Agnes, she said, come here. The old woman approached. Deb showed her without letting go of the animal. With her fingers, she separated the feathers until it was clearly visible. A small, dark leather pouch, the size of a thumb, sewn with thick waxed thread directly to the skin of the wing. The stitching was old but solid. Agnes touched it. Her fingers trembled. Do you have small scissors? She asked in a voice that was not the same as a moment before. Deb went in and returned with a pair of sewing scissors. She cut the stitches carefully, one by one, without rushing, while holding the animal still against her chest. The small pouch fell into Agnes's palm. The two women looked at each other. Neither said anything. They went into the kitchen, closed the door, put the hen on the floor, and sat at the table. Agnes opened the pouch. Inside was a paper folded in four twice over itself, thin like old letter paper, but in good condition, thanks to the leather, which had protected it from years of sweat and moisture. Agnes unfolded it with fingers that still trembled a little. She placed it on the table. It was a list, names, dates, amounts, handwritten in a small, tight script that Agnes recognized before reading the first line. It was Old Man O'Malley's handwriting. There was no possible confusion. She had seen that handwriting in contracts, in letters, in the lists of animals the old man made every year. It was unmistakable. The handwriting of someone who learned to write late, and did so with effort and precision. Each letter slowly formed. The list had 12 entries, each saying the same thing: a date, a place or person's name, and an amount. Beside some entries was an initial, F. Deb leaned over the paper and read it in silence. Then she read it again. Frank, she whispered. Agnes looked up. What do you know about Frank? She asked. I know that name, Deb said, and I know those amounts. They're for cattle. Cows. That's what those amounts are worth. The two read the complete list. 12 thefts, 4 different regions, dates spanning almost 3 years, names of properties and owners, and next to each, the initial F, which according to the paper left no doubt as to who had organized each operation. At the end of the list, in slightly larger handwriting, Old Man O'Malley had written 2 lines. I knew this when I could no longer act alone. Whoever finds this paper, take it to clean hands, not the local authorities. Someone from outside. Agnes stared at those 2 lines. She understood everything at once. Why Old Man O'Malley had given it to her. Because he knew Agnes would never let go of that hen. Because he knew her. Because on the paddock, she was the only thing Frank didn't control. The paper had been traveling for 4 years, attached to an animal no one looked at. Waiting for the moment, Agnes didn't speak for a long time. Deb respected that silence, picked up the paper, folded it carefully again, and placed it in the center of the table, without putting it away yet. The old woman looked at the hen, which had settled under the chair, and seemed completely oblivious to everything its body had carried for years. The pieces all fit together with that uncomfortable precision that things have when the truth finally finds its form. Old Man O'Malley knew what Frank was doing. He knew it with names, dates, and amounts, because he was a man who kept accounts of everything, who remembered every cattle transaction in 4 surrounding regions, who knew the prices and the animals and who owned them. When cattle began to disappear and rumors reached him, he didn't speak. He couldn't. He was dying and too weak to confront a constable with armed men, but he wrote everything down and hid it in the only place where it was safe. Meredith. Meredith had thrown Agnes out with the hen because the hen bothered her, because it was another mouth to feed, because she wanted a clean yard, not knowing that in that animal was the only thing that could destroy Frank. Meredith doesn't know what she did, Agnes said aloud, more to herself than to Deb. No, Deb said, but Frank will want to know where that paper is when someone tells him you're in town with that hen. Agnes looked at Deb. Do you think someone in this town will tell him? Frank has eyes everywhere, Deb said bluntly. He's been putting them there for 3 years. Agnes nodded slowly, not with fear, but with the cold calm of someone who has just understood the exact size of the problem she is facing. Then we have to move before he does, she said. Deb looked at her. That sentence didn't come from a frightened old woman. It came from a woman who had buried husbands, birthed children alone, and walked 4 hours under the sun with destroyed knees. "Yes," Deb said, "we have to move." It was then that Deb told her story, not all of it, just the parts that mattered to understand why she was willing to help. Her husband's name was Bert. He was a small cattleman, one of those who had 20 head of cattle, and cared for them as if they were 20 children. 3.5 years ago, Bert began to notice a strange pattern in the region. Animals disappearing at night, without a trace, without official reports ever going anywhere, because the person in charge of receiving them was Frank himself. Bert spoke about it, not aloud, not in the town square, but to the wrong person at the wrong time, to someone who went and told Frank. 3 weeks later, Bert went out to check the paddocks by the river and didn't return. They found the horse alone 2 days later with the saddle on, near a river crossing that swelled greatly in winter. The official conclusion was that the horse bolted, Bert fell, and the river carried him away. No one found the body, no one investigated thoroughly. Frank signed the report. Deb knew. She had no proof of anything, but she knew that certainty without proof is the worst kind of pain because it has nowhere to go. She could do nothing with it. 3 years carrying that, she said, without being able to tell anyone, because without proof, one just seems like a bitter widow. Agnes listened to all this without interrupting. When Deb finished, she looked directly at her. "On that paper are the names of the stolen cattle owners," she said. "If your husband reported, it's possible his name is also there." Deb looked down at the paper on the table, searched, read slowly. In the 7th entry, next to a date from 3 years and 2 months ago, there was a small property name she recognized. Esperanza was Bert's paddock. 12 head of cattle, value noted, initial F beside it. Deb didn't cry. She remained very still for a moment and then lifted her head. "Where do we put this?" she asked in a firm voice. "I don't know yet," Agnes said, "but not inside the pouch. If Frank sends someone, that's the first thing they'll look for." The two women looked at each other. The hen clucked softly under the chair. They decided to keep the folded paper inside Deb's Bible, between the pages of the Book of Job, which was the thickest and least likely to be checked by someone looking for something quickly. They also decided not to tell anyone yet. Not Callum, who was unpredictable when scared, not any neighbor, just between the two of them, until they had clarity on how to proceed. The problem was something neither of them calculated. The afternoon Agnes arrived in town with the hen, someone had seen her. It wasn't malicious intent, it was the normal curiosity of a small town where everyone knows everyone. And an old woman arriving on foot with a suitcase and a live hen tied with a string attracted attention. That someone was Liam, a 16-year-old boy who worked at the general store and spent his time watching the street when there was no one to serve. Liam saw Agnes, recognized her because he had been at O'Malley's Ridge once with his father to buy corn. And that night he mentioned to his uncle that the lady from the paddock was in town with that strange hen no one was ever allowed to touch. Liam's uncle wasn't one of Frank's men, but the uncle's friend was. And in a town of that size, a conversation in the general store reaches where it needs to go in less than 24 hours. Agnes and Deb knew nothing of this as they organized the paper and spoke in low voices in the kitchen. 30 minutes from town, in a large weatherboard house, with a yard where horses were always tied, Frank received one of his men that afternoon. He listened to what they told him. He remained still for a moment. Then he picked up the glass of whiskey he had in his hand and put it down unfinished on the table. 3 years. 3 years searching for that paper, sure that old man O'Malley had hidden it on the paddock, mentally checking every corner without daring to enter. Because Lachlan was unpredictable, and suspicion could turn against him, and now it turned out that the paper had been in an old hen all that time. "Bring me the old woman," he said, "and bring me the animal." Frank was 47 years old, and had been the local constable for 12 years. In that time, he had learned that power in small towns is not given by office, it is given by fear. And he had cultivated that fear with patience and intelligence. He was not a man who shouted. He was not one to use force without calculating. He was worse than that. He was calm, methodical, the kind of person who watches you while you speak and is already deciding what he's going to do before you finish your sentence. That afternoon, he gathered 2 trusted men. Rogan, who was big and silent and did what he was told without question, and Jock, who was thin and clever and knew the town like the back of his hand. He gave them precise instructions. He didn't want a scandal. He didn't want anyone in town to know that he had an interest in that old woman. What he wanted was simple, that they go that night, after the town had fallen asleep, find where the woman and the animal were, retrieve what he needed, and bring it without making noise. If the woman cooperated, No one had to get hurt. If she didn't cooperate, there were ways to convince someone her age. He didn't say it with cruelty. He said it like someone explaining an administrative procedure. "What if she doesn't have the paper?" Jock asked. Frank looked at him. "She has it," he said. "Old man O'Malley left it to her for a reason. That old man did nothing without reason." Rogan and Jock left before nightfall to arrive in town, when the streets were empty. Frank remained alone in the yard. He drank the whiskey he had left earlier. He looked at the horses in the corral. He thought of old man O'Malley, that stubborn old man who had found out everything and instead of keeping quiet or negotiating, had decided to keep the evidence. He had died before Frank could talk to him, before he could solve the problem calmly. Now, the problem was an 9-year-old woman in a town half an hour away. 3 years of careful planning for everything to end like this. It had to be resolved that night. Patrick had not planned to stay in town. He had deliveries to make further down the route. A buyer waiting for him the next day with a shipment of bush honey and another of hides. His plan was to drop the old woman off at her son's house and continue on his way before sunset. But the town had only one general store, where whiskey and cigarettes were sold, and where people talked about everything. And Patrick had gone in to buy something before leaving. There he heard what he didn't expect to hear. Someone mentioned the lady who had arrived on foot with the hen. Another said they had seen her go into Deb's house at night in the rain. Another said something about Jock having passed through town that afternoon for no apparent reason, and that Rogan too, and that when those two appeared together around here, there was always a job involved. Patrick paid for his things and left the store slowly. He stood on the pavement with the saddlebags in his hand, looking down the street. Jock and Rogan, Frank's men. He remembered Agnes's face when she mentioned Frank on the road. The way he himself had cut short his answer before it became too obvious. He remembered that he hadn't given his full surname when the old woman asked for it. There were reasons for that. Patrick Elroy Vance had very specific reasons not to announce his full name in certain places and not to sleep soundly when Rogan and Jock were near a person he had brought to town. He went to the pub where he usually stayed when he stopped there, a simple room above the bakery with a window overlooking the street. He tied his horse in the pub's corral, left his saddlebags inside. He wasn't leaving that town tonight. He couldn't quite explain why yet. He just knew that when you know the kind of man Frank is and you see his dogs moving in the same direction as an old woman who arrived alone with a hen, you can't just leave and pretend you didn't know. He couldn't. Not again. The night fell without a moon. Agnes had been at Deb's house for 2 nights now, and something in her body had begun to settle into the new place. Her knees were still the same. The pain was the same, but the bed was good, and Deb cooked with salt and enthusiasm, which was more than she had had on Callum's veranda. That night, they went to bed early. Deb turned off the living room light at 9. The hen was in the interior courtyard in her new box, a wooden one Deb had gotten from the local carpenter. At 11, Agnes woke up. She didn't know what woke her. It wasn't a loud noise. It was the absence of noise. The town at that hour always had something. A dog barking in the distance. The wind moving through the rooftops. Some radio someone left on. That night there was nothing, an unnatural silence. The old woman sat up in bed, listened. No sound came from the interior courtyard. The hen wasn't clucking. That was the strange thing. That animal always made some noise when something was nearby, but now it made none. And in Agnes's experience, old hens didn't suddenly go quiet without reason. She got up without turning on any lights. She went barefoot to the room's window, which faced the street, and looked through the edge of the curtain without opening it. The street was empty, but on the other side, almost against Callum's gate wall, there was a shadow that wasn't part of the wall, a shadow that wasn't moving, but that was breathing. Agnes moved away from the window, went to Deb's room, and touched her shoulder. Deb's eyes snapped open, like someone who never sleeps, completely soundly. "There's someone outside," Agnes said in a very low voice. "More than one." Deb sat up. The two women looked at each other in the dark. "The paper," Deb said. "I know," Agnes said. They had little time, and both knew it. Deb went to the dark living room, grabbed the Bible from the shelf, and took out the folded paper from between the pages of the Book of Job. She brought it to the kitchen. Agnes was already there with the hen in her arms, which Deb had brought in from the yard without turning on lights, moving by memory in her own house. The paper was small. That played in their favor. "It has to be in a place where they won't look," Agnes said softly, looking at the animal. Deb understood. Not in the leather pouch again. That was the first thing someone would look for after the pouch. But the animal had dense feathers, especially on its neck, where the plumage was tighter and harder to check in the dark or in a hurry. Agnes folded the paper once more, made it very thin, and with a piece of thread that Deb cut from the sewing box, she tied it, covered by the feathers of its crop. The animal moved a little but didn't protest loudly. That Anowell had an extraordinary tolerance for what was put on it. They had just finished when they heard the knock on the gate. It wasn't gentle. It was a knock that said, "We'll open it if you don't." Deb went to open it. There was no point in pretending no one was there. The lights from the kitchen bulb could be seen under the door. They were two men, one big-shouldered who filled the doorway, the other thin, with a hat carrying a flashlight. "Good evening," the thin man said with a voice that pretended to be friendly. "We're looking for a lady who arrived in town yesterday, an older woman by the name of Agnes. We were told she was here." "Who's asking?" Deb said, not moving from the frame. "We're from the constable's office. Routine. At 11 at night." "Routine," Deb said. Deb stepped aside. The two men entered. The big one, Rogan, went straight to the living room, without being invited. He searched with the flashlight, moved the sofa cushions, opened the drawer of the side table, found nothing. Jock stayed in the kitchen, watching the two women. "Where's the animal?" he asked. "What animal?" Deb said. Jock smiled from one side of his mouth, that smile of someone who knows they're being lied to and doesn't care because they have time. "The hen," he said, "the one the lady brought." Agnes stepped forward. "The hen is in the yard," she said with the voice of someone who has nothing to hide. "Take her if you want. She's an old animal that's no longer any good." Rogan went to the yard with the flashlight. The hen was in its wooden box, calm. He shone the light on it, checked the box, roughly put his hand among the feathers. The animal clucked loudly. Rogan lifted its wings, checked its belly, squeezed its sides looking for something hard. He didn't find the leather pouch because there was no leather pouch, only feathers. He returned to the kitchen. "There's nothing," he told Jock. Jock looked at Agnes, stared at her for a long time. She met his gaze without blinking. "Constable Frank wants to speak with you," he finally said. "Both of you, tonight." Deb opened her mouth to say something, but Agnes briefly placed her hand on her arm. "I'll go," the old woman said. "Both," Jock repeated. "She's unwell," Agnes said, pointing to Deb. "I'll go alone." Jock looked at Deb. Deb didn't look unwell, but Jock also didn't want unnecessary complications. If the paper wasn't in the house and the old woman said she would go, that was enough to fulfill the instruction. "The hen too," Agnes said, grabbing the hen from the box. The paper was still attached to its neck, invisible among the dense plumage. They went out to the street. Deb remained alone in the kitchen with cold hands and a rapidly beating heart. She closed the gate, leaned her back against it, and began to think about what to do next. Frank's house was on the outskirts of town, where the dirt road became open country. It was a large construction for that region, thick weatherboard, a spacious yard, its own chicken coop, and a veranda with hammocks where men sat to smoke. They took Agnes to the veranda and motioned for a chair. She sat down with the hen on her lap. Rogan went inside. Jock remained standing in the yard. Frank came out a few minutes later. He was a man who didn't impress at first glance, neither very tall nor very short. An ordinary face, hair combed back, clean clothes. What set him apart was what had already been mentioned, his quiet, calculating eyes, the eyes of someone who was always measuring. He sat opposite her on a tall-legged chair and looked at her for a moment in silence. "Agnes," he said, "I'm sorry they disturbed you at this hour. You have to understand there are matters that can't wait. You understand that I'm 89 years old and I'm pulled out of bed at night," Agnes said. "I'm sorry," Frank said without sounding apologetic at all. "I promise this won't take long. I just need one thing." "What thing?" "You know what thing." Agnes looked at him. A man accustomed to people shrinking when he looked at them, accustomed to silence and a fixed gaze doing the work others did with shouting. Agnes had buried her husband alone. She had birthed Lachlan without a hospital. She had endured 40 years on a paddock at the mercy of the weather and debt. There was no one on that veranda who could scare her with a look. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said. "Old man O'Malley. He left you something," Frank said. "Something that doesn't belong to you, that in reality doesn't belong to anyone. It's old, misunderstood information that will only cause problems if it circulates. Old man O'Malley left me a hen," Agnes said. Frank nodded slowly. "And inside that hen," he said, "you didn't find anything interesting." Agnes held his gaze. The animal on her lap didn't move. She didn't say, "Memory doesn't announce when it's going to arrive. It simply arrives." While Frank watched her from that chair and calculated his next sentence, Agnes was carried unintentionally to that night 4 years ago, the dimly lit room, the smell of medicine and tallow candle. Old man O'Malley in bed, his body already surrendered, but his eyes still clear, had called her, not Lachlan, who was the heir, not Meredith, who ran the house. He had gripped her wrist with a hand that trembled but squeezed. Agnes, he had told her, what's coming in this house is going to be difficult. There are men who believe that because one dies, what one knows also dies. But it's not like that. She had asked him what he was talking about. He had shaken his head. You don't need to know, he said. You just need to never let go of that hen, even if they tell you she's old and useless, even if they offer to buy her, even if they put the pot in your face. Why that hen? She had asked. The old man had closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, he had an expression Agnes had never seen on him, something that was both weariness and hope. Because you are the only one on this paddock that man will not be able to buy or scare, he said. You don't know who he is, and that's why you don't fear him. And one day the time will come. When it comes, you will know what to do with what she carries. Take it to clean hands. Agnes emerged from the memory. Frank was still looking at her. He had asked her something while she was absent and was waiting for an answer. Can you repeat that? Agnes said. Frank frowned slightly. He wasn't accustomed to being asked to repeat himself. I'm asking if you're sure you didn't find anything in that animal. I already answered you, Agnes said. Twice is enough. Frank stood up, walked to the edge of the veranda, and looked at the dark yard. The horses in the corral moved slightly. Agnes, he said, without turning around. You're old. You've had a difficult life. It doesn't have to end worse than it began. Don't threaten me, Agnes said with absolute calm. I'm not afraid of you. Frank turned to look at her. For the first time that night, in his quiet eyes, something appeared that wasn't calculation. It was something else. It was uncertainty. Deb didn't stay still for 5 minutes. As soon as she closed the gate and heard the men's footsteps receding down the street with Agnes among them, she went directly to the kitchen drawer where she kept a small torch. She put on her shawl and went out. Don Sid's pub was 3 streets away. It was the only pub in town, above the bakery, with a wooden door that creaked when opened. Deb had seen a stock horse with 2 saddlebags tied there that afternoon, and she had recognized the drover because Bert had known him from before. She knocked on the pub door. Don Sid, who was a light sleeper, opened it with a grumpy face. The drover who arrived today, Deb said, Is he here at this hour? It's urgent. Don Sid knew her. He knew she wasn't one to exaggerate. He pointed to the room at the end of the hallway and went back to his bed. Deb knocked on the door. Once, a pause. Again. Who is it? Said the voice inside. It wasn't the voice of someone who was asleep. It was the voice of someone who was waiting. Deb, Agnes's neighbor. The door opened in seconds. Patrick was dressed. His boots were on, and his jacket hung over his arm, as if he had already calculated that the night would not end calmly. Deb told him everything in less than 3 minutes, standing in the pub hallway, in a low voice, omitting nothing. The men, the hen, the paper, Frank's house on the outskirts. Patrick listened without interrupting. When she finished, he put on his jacket. How many men does Frank have at the house? He asked. At night, usually 2 or 3. Patrick nodded. You're not going, he said. I'm not asking for permission, Deb said. Patrick looked at her for a second, then nodded again. Then let's go, he said. They walked quickly through the dark streets when Deb asked what she needed to know. Why do you hate him? She didn't say it as an accusation. She said it as a direct question from someone who needed to understand who she was getting involved with in a dangerous situation in the early morning. Patrick walked a little further before replying. My brother, he said. Gary. He was 27. He was a stockman. Worked on one of the properties in the northern region. A pause. Gary was in the wrong place at the wrong time. One night he saw Rogan and 2 other men herding stolen cattle towards the hills. He recognized them. They saw him. What happened? He showed up in the river 3 days later, Patrick said. The official report said he fell from a cliff at night. Gary had known those paths since he was a child. There was no way he would fall at night in a place he walked 100 times during the day. Frank signed that report too. Frank signed that report? Patrick confirmed. Frank signed that report. Deb continued walking in silence for a moment. My husband and your brother, she said. Yes, Patrick said. No need to add anything else. Both knew exactly what kind of man Frank was, and exactly why they were on that dark street at that hour, and exactly how much was at stake. The lights of Frank's house could be seen from afar. A light was on in the veranda, and another in the yard. 2 figures outside. Jock sitting on a bench, Rogan standing by the corral. Patrick stopped before they could see them. We need to get Agnes out of there without Frank being able to do anything, he said. Not with violence. If we use violence, he wins. We need something he can't control. What? Deb said. Someone with more authority than him in this town, Patrick said. Deb thought. The circuit judge, she said. He arrives tomorrow morning, every fortnight, punctual as the sun. Where does he stay? At Mrs. O'Connell's, opposite the church. Patrick looked at her. Then Agnes needs to hold out until dawn, he said. And we need that judge to have the paper in his hand tomorrow before Frank knows he's arrived. The plan was simple, because it had to be. Complicated plans at midnight, with 2 people and only a few hours margin, don't work. Patrick was going to enter Frank's house, not to fight, not with weapons. He was going to enter because he had something Frank didn't expect. He knew him. Patrick had passed through those regions for 20 years, and Frank had seen him enough times to know he was a passing drover, with no direct ties to anyone in town, with no apparent reason to be an enemy. That's what he was going to use. Deb, meanwhile, was going to Mrs. O'Connell's house and leave a message for the circuit judge. Not the paper, which was still on the hen, just a message saying that a serious complaint was waiting for him upon his arrival, and that the person holding it was at risk that very night. If the judge arrived at dawn as always, he would have the message before breakfast. And if Frank decides not to wait? Deb asked. That's why I'm going in now, Patrick said. Frank is a calculator. He won't do anything in his own house if there's a witness present who doesn't have to stay quiet. His power depends on the shadow. Light cannot operate the same way. Deb nodded. It was logical. It was the best they had. And Lachlan? She asked. What about him? He's Agnes's son. If anyone has the right to know what's happening, it's him. Patrick thought about that. Do you know where he is? No, but Callum should know. He lives across the street from my house. When you go to leave the message for the judge, Patrick said, also knock on Callum's door. Tell him his mother needs someone to notify Lachlan. Don't tell him everything, just that. Deb nodded. They separated at the corner. Patrick continued towards the outskirts. Deb took the path towards the church. The night was cold and moonless, and the town slept, unaware of what was moving within it. Lachlan arrived in town at 1:30 inches the morning, not because Callum had notified him in time, but because someone else had done so earlier. One of the station hands from the neighboring paddock, who had seen Frank's men pass by on the road that afternoon, and had sent word to O'Malley's Ridge, in case anyone cared to know that the constable was moving people towards town on a strange day. Lachlan cared. He rode into town on horseback and went straight to Callum's house, because that was the address he had. Callum received him at the door in a singlet, disheveled, and looking like he had spent the night awake, with a heavy conscience. Where's Mum? Lachlan said. Callum told him what he knew, that his mother had arrived 2 days ago with the suitcase and the hen, that he had settled her on the veranda, that the neighbor Deb had taken her to her house, that night Deb had knocked on his window and told him there was a problem and to notify his brother. Lachlan looked at him. Mum arrived 2 days ago, and you told me 2 days ago? Callum didn't respond. The answer was in his silence. Lachlan clenched his jaw. It wasn't the time for that conversation, but the conversation was going to happen anyway. Later, when there was time, he left Callum's house and crossed the street. Deb had just returned from Mrs. O'Connell's and found Patrick at the corner of Frank's house. The 3 of them met right there, in the dark. Deb explained everything she knew to Lachlan. The paper, the leather pouch, Frank, what his father-in-law had hidden in the hen for 4 years, what was happening that night at the house on the outskirts. Lachlan listened, standing with the horse's reins in his hand. The expression on his face changed as he understood. It wasn't just concern for his mother. It was something deeper, more uncomfortable. It was the moment a man understands that his life had pieces he never saw, and that the person he least expected to need was the one who bore everything. I'm going in, Lachlan said. I'm already in, Patrick said. I went in half an hour ago. I got him out on the pretext of an errand. Agnes is fine, but Frank won't let her go just like that. I know him, Lachlan said. We all know him, Patrick said. That's not enough. What arrives at dawn is enough. Lachlan entered Frank's house alone, not in the dead of night. He arrived when the sky was already beginning to change from black to dark gray. That hour when the dawn warns the day that it's coming. Rogan stopped him at the gate. I've come to get my mother, Lachlan said. The constable is having a conversation with her, Rogan said. The conversation's over, Lachlan said. Something in Lachlan's voice told Rogan that arguing wasn't worth it. He was a 43-year-old man, his body hardened by the bush, with a calm on his face that was not cowardice. Rogan opened the way. Frank was on the veranda when Lachlan entered. Agnes was still sitting with the hen. She had been there for hours, without water, without moving, without changing her expression. Frank saw Lachlan and wasn't surprised. Surprise was a luxury, that man didn't allow himself. "Lachlan," he said, "it's good you arrived. Your mother and I were having a long conversation. The conversation's over," Lachlan said, looking at his mother. Agnes stood up alone with the hen under her arm, her teeth clenched against the pain in her knees that had been in that chair for hours. She didn't ask for help. Frank took a step forward. "Lachlan," he said in a lower voice, "there's an outstanding matter between us, something your father-in-law kept, and that is now floating around unnecessarily. If that paper circulates, there will be names of people from this region who don't deserve to be involved in a problem. People you know. That's not good for anyone." Lachlan looked at him. "My father-in-law died 4 years ago," he said. "And you're still worried about what he wrote?" Frank didn't respond. "That means it's true," Lachlan said. A complete silence. Rogan was in the yard. Jock was on the side veranda. Lachlan knew it and didn't move a muscle. "My mother is leaving now," he said. Frank looked at him for a long time, calculating, measuring what would happen if he prevented her departure in front of a son, a witness with a name and a paddock and people who knew him. It wasn't the same as an old woman alone in the early morning. Doubt crossed him. That doubt was enough. Agnes walked towards the gate. Lachlan walked with her. No one stopped them. Outside, the sky continued to change from grey to lighter grey. Dawn was on its way. They left Frank's house with firm steps. Lachlan walked beside his mother, not holding her arm as if she were fragile, but alongside her. As one walks beside someone who doesn't need to be carried, but who also shouldn't be left alone. Agnes pressed the hen against her chest. The animal was silent, as if it had decided that for this night, it was enough. Half a block away, where the street widened next to the old gum tree that stood in front of the public laundry trough, Patrick and Deb waited for them. The four met without hugs, without fuss. The moment didn't call for that. Lachlan looked his mother in the face in the dim light. Agnes had her hair loose, her skirt wrinkled from hours in that chair, her boots dusty from the road. She was tired with a depth that the body cannot hide, but her eyes were the same eyes as always, quiet, clear, asking for no pity. Lachlan didn't speak. He hugged her. It wasn't a quick, perfunctory hug. It was the embrace of a man who had just understood how much he had failed to see by looking in another direction. Agnes received him. She placed her free hand on his back, the same hand with which she had held him when he was small and afraid. They remained like that for a moment. Then they separated. "The judge arrives at dawn," Deb said. "We have an hour," Patrick said. "The paper," Agnes said. She passed the hen to Deb, who held the animal with experience. Agnes put her fingers among the feathers of its neck, searched, and in a moment found the thread. She unrolled the paper carefully. It was intact, slightly warm from the animal's heat. She held it in her hand in the darkness of dawn. Lachlan looked at it, recognized his father-in-law's handwriting, read the first lines, and stood still. "How long have you known this?" he asked his mother. 2 days, Agnes said. Old man O'Malley knew 4 years. Lachlan nodded slowly. There was much to process. It wasn't the moment. The moment was another. "What does the judge need to act?" he asked. "This paper and those who want to speak," Deb said. "I'll speak," Deb said. "And Patrick too." "Me too," Lachlan said. The circuit judge was named Justice Cunningham. He was 55 years old. He was thin and orderly, with round glasses and a small leather briefcase that he always carried himself, even when offered help. He arrived in town every fortnight on the 5:30 a.m. bus. He settled at Mrs. O'Connell's house, had a cup of tea, and by 7 a.m. he was already receiving matters in the council hall that was lent to him for the occasion. That morning, when he got off the bus still in the early hours, he found Mrs. O'Connell waiting for him at the door, looking like she hadn't slept. She handed him the message Deb had left, a folded sheet in hurried handwriting. "There is a serious complaint that cannot wait. People are at risk tonight. Please, before settling in, receive whoever comes forward at dawn." Justice Cunningham read the message, drank his tea standing, and did not go to sleep. At 6:10 a.m., when the sky was already that reddish-orange of an August dawn, Agnes, Lachlan, Deb, and Patrick knocked on Mrs. O'Connell's door. They were shown into the living room. Mrs. O'Connell disappeared discreetly. Justice Cunningham looked at them one by one before speaking. "I was given to understand there is an urgency," he said. "Yes," Agnes said. She handed him the folded paper. The judge opened it. He read in silence. His hands held the paper carefully, but something in the tension of his fingers said that what he was reading was not indifferent to him. He read twice. Then he lowered the paper and looked at them. "Who else can support this?" he said. "I can," Deb said. "My husband was killed for speaking out before this proof existed. His name is on the list. I can, Patrick said. My brother also disappeared for the same reason. I can, Lachlan said. The handwriting is my father-in-law's. I can prove it with documents bearing his signature. Justice Cunningham looked at Agnes. And you, ma'am? Agnes met the judge's gaze. I am the one who carried this for 4 years without knowing, she said. And who brought it here? Justice Cunningham folded the paper carefully and put it in his leather briefcase. Then he stood up. I will need you not to leave this town today, he said. At 7:15 inches the morning, when the town was beginning to move with the slow rhythm of ordinary days, 2 troopers who accompanied the circuit judge on his visits left Mrs. O'Connell's house heading towards the outskirts. They were not alone. Justice Cunningham went with them, the leather briefcase under his arm, his glasses glinting in the already strong sun. The arrest warrant was verbal for now, backed by the document. The formal process would come later, with the full apparatus of the law. But Justice Cunningham had sufficient authority to act preventively in the face of a complaint of that magnitude, especially when there were 3 witnesses willing to support it with their own names. Frank's house was as it always was at that hour. Rogan was having tea on the veranda. The horses were in the corral. Jock was sleeping inside. Frank heard footsteps on the road and came out before they knocked. He saw the judge and the troopers. His face did not change expression, which was in itself a type of expression. Justice Cunningham, he said, I wasn't expecting a visit. Good morning, Frank, the judge said. I need you to come with me. Is there a problem? There is a formal complaint with written evidence and named witnesses. You need to accompany me now. Frank looked at the troopers, looked at the judge, calculated. Rogan got up from the bench and put his hand on his belt. The nearest trooper made no dramatic gesture, just positioned himself. It was Frank who stopped Rogan with a discreet signal, not because he surrendered, but because he was intelligent enough to know that resisting in front of the circuit judge in broad daylight with neighbors already starting to peek out their windows was the only move that could worsen things irrecoverably. I'll come, Frank said. Give me a moment for my hat. You have 2 minutes, Justice Cunningham said. They waited outside. When Frank came out, he walked beside the judge along the road to town with the troopers behind him, as the August sun rose and the town awoke, and the first people who saw them pass understood, without anyone explaining it to them, that something had changed that morning in the region. The news spread through the town like water finding its way. It wasn't an announcement, it wasn't a proclamation, it was what always happens in small towns. Someone saw Frank pass between the troopers and told the person next to them, and that person told whoever they found in the store, and that person called whoever lived on the next street. And in less than an hour, the town had more people in the streets than on a market day. The first to react were the cattlemen, 3 men who had lost animals in recent years, and who had filed reports that never went anywhere because the person who received them was the same one who filed them away. Those 3 men presented themselves at Mrs. O'Connell's house before 8 a.m. asking to speak with the judge. Then others arrived. A woman who said her husband had been threatened 2 years ago when he tried to make the same complaint. A station hand who said he had seen with his own eyes how cattle were herded at night, but who never spoke out for fear of what had happened to others. Old Man O'Malley's list had 12 entries. The testimonies that arrived that morning easily surpassed that. The paper had been the key, but behind that key was a large door that had been waiting for years to open. Deb was at Mrs. O'Connell's house when the people started arriving. She sat on a chair on the veranda and listened to each testimony with her arms crossed and her face still. She didn't cry. She had cried for 3 years alone in her house, without witnesses. This day was not for crying, it was for being present. Patrick wandered through the town with his hands in his pockets, speaking little, observing. He had lived 4 years waiting for a moment he didn't know if it would ever come. Now that it had, he wasn't quite sure what to do with it. Agnes was sitting in the chair in Mrs. O'Connell's living room, with the hen asleep on her lap, watching the door through which people entered and left who had kept silent for too long. Meredith arrived in town at 9:30 inches the morning. She came on the bus with a handbag and her face made up, as if for an important visit. She knew nothing. At the paddock, only the silence of the previous night and Lachlan's horse not appearing had registered, and Meredith had decided it was better to go to town to see what was happening than to stay waiting. She got off the bus at the town square stop, and the first thing she saw was people gathered in groups in the streets, talking animatedly with that expression of a town that has experienced something important and doesn't quite know how to classify it yet. She asked a woman she knew what all the commotion was about. The woman explained it in 3 sentences. Meredith said nothing. She stood on the pavement with her handbag hanging from her arm, processing what she had just heard. Frank, arrested. The circuit judge. A paper with evidence. Agnes in the middle of everything. Agnes with that hen. Meredith was not stupid. The instant she heard the word hen, she understood with brutal clarity exactly what she had done, exactly what she had set in motion when she thought she was solving a domestic problem. She had unwittingly taken from the paddock the only evidence that could destroy Frank, and had put it into the hands of the only person who would guard it without yet understanding why. She searched for Lachlan with her eyes among the crowd. She found him leaving Mrs. O'Connell's house. She crossed the street towards him. Lachlan saw her coming. He didn't wait for her with open arms. He didn't move to greet her. He stood in the doorway and let her reach him. Meredith opened her mouth. "Lachlan, I didn't know." "I know you didn't know," he said. "That's the only thing I still don't understand about you. How you can do so much harm without knowing anything." They didn't shout. That was the hardest part. Shouting would have been easier. Shouts end, and then there's space to breathe. What Lachlan did was worse. He spoke with that calm of someone who doesn't have much to lose emotionally in that conversation anymore. They moved away from Mrs. O'Connell's door towards the street corner, where there were a few less people. Meredith carried her handbag, not knowing what to do with her hands. "When did your mother arrive in town?" Lachlan asked. "I sent her 2 days ago," Meredith said, choosing the verb carefully. "You sent her?" Lachlan said. "The situation on the paddock." "The situation on the paddock." He interrupted her without raising his voice. "The thing is, I arrived the night before last and my mother wasn't there. There was no sign, no reason, nothing. You told me she had decided to leave. That's not exactly. You lied to me." Meredith didn't respond. Lachlan nodded slowly, not with acceptance, but with the gesture of someone confirming something they already suspected. "I didn't know about the paper," Meredith said. "I swear it. The hen for me was just an old animal taking up space. I never imagined." "I'm not talking about the paper," Lachlan said. "I'm talking about my mother. About how you kicked her out of the house she built, with her own hands at 89 years old, with an old suitcase and a hen you wanted her to eat on the way." Meredith squeezed her handbag. "I arrived at the paddock yesterday at 7 inches the evening," Lachlan continued. "I had already been warned that something was happening. Do you know what I felt when I went in and saw her empty room? The empty chair, 40 years of my mother's things piled in a corner, as if they were junk." Meredith didn't respond. "I knew that from the moment I arrived," Lachlan said, "without anyone telling me anything. I knew it because I know her, and I also knew that you waited until I wasn't there." Silence. "I don't know what will happen to us," Lachlan said, "but my mother is coming back to the paddock. That's not up for discussion." He turned around and went back to Mrs. O'Connell's door. The trial was not in a courthouse. There was no courthouse in that town. Justice Cunningham had the power to conduct preliminary hearings in suitable spaces when he was on circuit, and that day the most suitable space turned out to be the town square. Not because anyone planned it that way, but because people had arrived on their own and no longer fit in any enclosed space. Chairs were placed in front of the fountain. The judge set up at a table someone took from the council office. The troopers formed a perimeter that was more symbolic than truly enforcing order. They were not there to cause disorder, they were there to listen. Frank was seated in a chair in front of the judge, his hands crossed on his knees, not yet handcuffed. That would come later with the formal process. For now, it was a charge and discharge hearing in the presence of witnesses, which was what the law allowed on circuit. The testimonies were heard one by one. Patrick spoke of his brother Gary. He spoke with a calm that came from 4 years of rehearsing those words without knowing if he would ever have anyone to say them to. He gave dates, names, circumstances. The square listened in silence. Deb spoke of Bert. She said everything she had kept for 3 years in that house where she had lived alone since her husband didn't return from the river. She didn't cry. She said it as facts are stated, with precision and without embellishment. The 3 cattlemen spoke of the stolen animals. The station hand spoke of what he had seen at night. The woman whose husband was threatened spoke of the consequences of trying to report. Frank listened to everything. His face did not change. He was, until the end, the same calculating man as always. But the silence around him was different from the silence before. The silence before was the silence of fear. This was the silence of truth that no longer has anywhere to hide. Justice Cunningham took notes. "Read passages from Old Man O'Malley's paper aloud." The entire square listened to the handwriting of a dead man speaking from the past with names, dates, and amounts. Rogan and Jock were named in 3 different testimonies. The sun rose. The square remained full. When the judge asked if anyone else wanted to speak, there was a moment of silence. Then Agnes stood up. She did it alone, without anyone helping her, although Lachlan was by her side and Deb too. She stood on the knees that had been destroying themselves for decades, adjusted her shawl over her shoulders, and walked to the space in front of the judge's table. She left the hen with Lachlan. For the first time in days, the old woman's hands were free. The entire square watched her. There were people who knew her and people who didn't. There were people who had passed by that drama without seeing it, and people who lived with similar dramas and had never found the space to speak about them. Agnes looked at the judge, then looked at Frank, then looked at the square. "I didn't come here to make a speech," she said. Her voice was firm, not loud, but firm, the kind of voice that doesn't need volume to be heard. "I came because I have something to say, and because it's time to say it." A pause. "I'm 89 years old. I lived 40 years on that paddock, working every day. I buried my husband, raised my sons, kept that house going when there was no corn, and one Tuesday in August, they threw me out with a cardboard suitcase and an old hen, on foot under the sun, as if everything I did in that life wasn't worth the space I occupied. The square made no sound. No one told me I was carrying evidence. No one explained that animal had a secret. I cared for it because a good man asked me to, and because one keeps their word. That was all." She looked directly at Frank. "You are 47 years old, and you have spent 12 years using your position to steal and to silence those who protested. That is not debated here today, because the paper says it and the witnesses confirm it. What I do want to say is this. You counted on no one speaking, on fear lasting longer than truth. You were wrong." She paused. "I ask for nothing, just that it be clear to you that this square is full of people you thought you could control forever. And here we are." She turned to the judge. "That's all I had to say." She returned to her chair. It took the square a moment to react. Then someone began to applaud, and behind that person came the others. Not with the roar of a spectacle, but with the weight of something that is applauded because it is true and because it is necessary for someone to see it. When the hearing ended, and Justice Cunningham announced that Frank would be preventively detained pending the formal process, the square slowly dispersed. As people disperse when something important ends, and each returns to their own life to process it. Agnes was sitting in the chair where they had put her, with the hen back on her lap. Deb was beside her. Patrick was a little further away, with his arms crossed and his gaze fixed on no particular point. That gesture of men who have just done something they had been waiting years to do, and still don't quite know what they feel. Lachlan was with the judge, answering standard questions about the authenticity of the document. It was then that Callum approached. He had been in the square from the beginning, at the back, in a place where he wouldn't be seen too easily. He hadn't come forward to speak. He had nothing to add to the complaint. He had just been present, listening. He walked towards his mother with slow steps that were not the steps of someone bringing a message or an explanation. They were the steps of someone who doesn't quite know how to arrive, but knows that he has to arrive anyway. Agnes saw him coming and did not change her expression. Callum stood in front of her, wanted to say something, opened his mouth, and closed it. Words are strange when shame is genuine. They don't come out. He knelt there in the square, in front of the people who remained. Her 5-2-year-old son knelt in front of her, without drama, without gestures. He knelt and bowed his head, which was all he could do. Agnes looked at him for a moment, then raised her hand and placed it on his head, among her son's thinning hair, which had aged without her fully seeing it. She said nothing. It wasn't necessary. That silence was not punishment. It was something more complicated and more real. It was a mother who recognized that her son was not a bad man, just a man who had not yet learned the weight of what he owed her and who was just beginning to understand it. Deb looked away discreetly. Patrick wiped something from his face with the back of his hand without fuss. The hen clucked softly once, as if putting a full stop. They returned to the paddock the next day. Lachlan ahead on his horse, carrying the cardboard suitcase in one of the saddlebags. Agnes behind on Patrick's horse, which the drover offered without anyone asking. The hen in the old woman's arms. As always, the road was the same as always. The dust, the August heat, the bare hillsides. But the road back has a different texture than the road there, even if it's exactly the same. They arrived at midday. The gate to O'Malley's Ridge was closed. Lachlan dismounted, put in the key, opened it wide. The hinges creaked just as always. Agnes looked at the paddock from the entrance, the dirt yard, the old gum tree she had planted the year Lachlan was born, with the dry August leaves falling slowly, the weatherboard walls with their usual color, the old chair on the veranda where she had sat 1,000 mornings. Nothing had changed on the paddock. Everything had changed in everything else. Meredith was not there. Lachlan hadn't said where she had gone. Agnes didn't ask. Those were accounts that were not hers. And at some point in those August days, She had learned with clarity which accounts were hers and which were not. She entered. Her boots touched the dirt yard of the paddock, the same sound as always. She went to the veranda, sat in her chair. The chair creaked slightly, recognizing her. She released the hen. The animal fell to the yard floor with that dignified clumsiness of old birds. It shook its feathers, looked around as if surveying the territory, and began to walk free, without a string, without a rope, without a small leather pouch sewn to its wing, without secrets to carry, without anything other than being an old hen in a yard it knew well. Agnes watched it walk. Lachlan stood in the center of the yard, not knowing quite what to do with his hands. What was happening to him when he felt responsible for something and didn't know how to repair it? The old woman looked up at him. "Close the gate," she said. Lachlan went and closed the gate. Without a lock this time, Agnes looked back at the hen, scratching near the clay water trough, as she had every morning of her life. The August sun beat down on the yard with the same force as always, and Agnes remained there in her chair, on her paddock, with her years and her knees and her story, watching that animal walk free in the yard, like her.